Welcome to this international series of webinars on local content policy. We focus on the implementation experiences of local content policy in emerging hydrocarbons markets. My name is ADRIANO NUVUNGA, the Director of CDD, and I'm the host of these international series of webinars. With me today, I have Pauline ANAMAN. Pauline ANAMAN is a policy analyst from ACEP, our good colleague from Ghana, who is our guest speaker today, who will be sharing the Ghanaian experience on local content in the extractive sector. I am also joined by Professor NHABINDE, who represents the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Mozambique. He will be, he features in this debate today as discussant. As you know, the Ministry of Economy and Finance is leading the design of Mozambique local content policy. So we are joined by the ministry as part of the learning process in order to do things right. Let me give you a bit of context before we get started. As you know, Mozambique is blessed with world-class gas reserves. Mozambique has about 100 certified TCF in northern Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. But you know that monetization of natural gas, it is capital intensive and it takes a bit more of time compared to oil in order to bring the necessary revenues for socio-economic development. In this sense, local content policies are the first opportunity for economic growth by encouraging local production to supply industry, create jobs for young people, and generate some taxes. Building linkages with the extractive and other sectors of the economy is another advantage associated with local content policy. This is an important issue, but it hasn't been the pattern in most of oil and gas abundant emerging markets in Africa, Mozambique included. With the by COVID-19 and also by the insurgent, Mozambique was expected to take swift moves in order to have its local content policy approved and implemented. However, government has shelved the local content bill approved in August 2019 by the Economic Council. And all that bill needs is an analysis, revision, and approval by the Council of Ministers before it is sent to Parliament for enactment. Knowing the importance of this law for the Mozambican context, there is no doubt that the government is being pressured by sectors with vested interests to delay these processes. This is seriously impacting possibilities of Mozambique generating some low-hanging fruits, particularly creating jobs for the young people. And these jobs are much needed, not only country, but particularly in the Cabo Delgado area, where Mozambique is facing an insurgency, and the youth are said to be kind of struggling to get jobs, and that could help them move away from being recruited to join the insurgents. It is within this context that CDD, the Center for Democracy and Development, intends to influence this process, bringing to the public debate the experiences of emerging countries in hydrocarbons, to understand how they have conducted their process of production, public consultation, and approval of their local content laws. More importantly, it is to understand how these countries are implementing their local content policies and how it reflects in the development process of the private sector, in particular, and the economies in general. This webinar series, it will tap experiences from Angola, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Botswana, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Timor-Leste, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And the inaugural webinar today, the 29th of October, afternoon, Thursday, it will focus on Ghana, the Ghanaian experience. The speaker, as I've already indicated, is ANAMAN, is policy analyst at the Center for Energy. Ghana in Accra, and as I've also indicated, Dr. Vasco Nyabindi will represent the Ministry of Economy and Finance as discussant this afternoon. This session is via Zoom, but it is also live streamed in our Facebook social media platforms. It can be followed. We have, for those who need the Portuguese to English and English to Portuguese translation. So you can follow in Portuguese, just selecting the translation facility that Zoom has created. Without further ado, I will move to my panelists and invite Pauline, whom I greet. Technology, she's speaking from Accra, and she will be sharing these insights with us on how the Ghanaians have managed to get people to participate and to have a law that caters the interests of whole society, and also implemented in a way that catalyzes economic development. Over to you, Pauline. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Adriano Nuvunga. Everybody hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Okay, that's great. All right, so I want to thank CDD for inviting me to do this presentation. This is my presentation outline. I'll first of all give a brief about my organization, and then give an overview of Ghana's petroleum sector, and then the local content, what local content means, and then the rationale for local content. And then I'll also talk about the actual local content law and implementation in Ghana and lessons for other countries like Mozambique. So, about the Africa Center for Energy Policy, we are a Ghanaian think tank based in Accra with partners across Africa, including CDD. Our objective is to link natural resource extraction, specifically minerals, oil and gas, and the power resources to development. And so we do this through research and analysis, advocacy, advisory services to governments, donor agencies, and even companies, in order that whatever we extract actually benefits the people of Ghana and Africa. We have 5 main thematic areas looking at contract governance, revenue governance, institutional development. We are also key about, we see diversity, equity, and inclusion as important to resource extraction for development. And also we need to extract the resource with the environment in mind, thinking about sustainability of the future. So these are areas that we work in. I won't spend much time here talking about my organization, but let's move straight into the discussion. Can you hear me?
Loud and clearly.
Perfect. So the topic is the law and practice of local content in Ghana's extractive sector. Now, the extractive sector is broad. It basically means those sectors that that contribute resources that are extracted from the ground or from the sea, from natural extraction of resources. Now, I would focus on the petroleum sector in Ghana and maybe bring in the mining sector because the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative is an initiative that Ghana has joined, and we define the extractive sector to include the oil and gas, that is the petroleum sector, and then the mining. So my focus is on the petroleum sector, but I'll speak briefly about the mining to give you an insight about local content in the mining sector in Ghana as well. Now, in Ghana, we started extracting oil in commercial quantities in 2007. That's when we discovered oil in 2007. But before 2007, there had been a series of exploration activities dating as far back as the 80s, but not significant commercial quantity of oil and gas was discovered. So it was not until 2007 that Tullow Oil PLC, Cosmos, came together to discover the oil in Ghana. Now, in 2010, we started producing our oil. The first oil came in December 2010, and that meant more revenues for the government of Ghana. Now, since that time to date, we have 18 petroleum agreements. The most recent that is published on the Ghana Petroleum Register is the ExxonMobil agreement. But last year, the government opened for the first time the open and competitive bidding process, which awarded 3 blocks to 2 companies. And it's under the process of ratification in Parliament. So once that is also approved, we'll have more agreements. But for now, it's 18 petroleum agreements. What you can see here is the various blocks in Ghana, petroleum blocks. Those areas dotted red are the blocks that where we made new discoveries last year. Now, last year, this is the level of production from our field. So even though we have all these blocks in Ghana, it is only 3 blocks that are producing oil and gas. And those blocks are the Jubilee field. We have the 10 field, TEN10 field, by Tullow Oil PLC. And then we have the So this is the data for production of oil and gas last year. As at the end of last year, this is how much we produced from. So the blue is what we projected to get. The orange is the actual production. And then the actual lifting versus lifting per agreement. So when there's always an agreement between the government of Ghana and the oil and gas companies, and the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation receives oil, lifts oil on behalf of Ghana. So that is our share in the yellow. Now, when it comes to revenue, this are my oil and gas. This is the total, it's in $1 million. Now, let's move on to local content. What does local content really mean? Now, local content has been defined by different authors, including the World Bank and OECD. And to summarize what we see here, it is mainly about procuring goods and services from in-country, from the country where oil and gas companies operate. It is also about employing or using local workforce. Beyond that, OECD adds on to say, local content involves investing in research and innovation so that the processes for extraction can improve to bring the benefits that we need faster. It also includes technology transfer. Basically means the oil and gas companies who have the technological know-how are able to teach the local people and the local companies that they partner with some technology that they use so that in their absence, local institutions, local companies can operate effectively. Now, the next question is, why do countries need local content policy? It has been established in research and by many bank, the Africa Center for Energy Policy ourselves, we've seen different research about extractive industry indicating clearly that countries that rely solely on revenues from the extractive sector, i.e. from the oil and gas sector, are likely to fail economically, are likely not to develop and expand their economies if they rely solely on the revenues that come. Evidence has also shown that when extraction happens and there is a link between the extraction, the oil and gas industry, which is our focus, and other sectors of the economy is likely to grow, jobs are likely to improve, revenues are likely to be retained in country, and companies, local industry is also likely to improve. So if oil and gas companies in Ghana, in Mozambique, in Nigeria, in Angola, if all these foreign oil and gas companies use local companies' supplies, if the input that they need to produce the oil and gas is supplied by local firms, and the supply from local firms is manufactured in country, then we are likely to retain a lot of value in the various African countries. So the whole rationale about local content really is to retain value beyond the fiscal take that governments get from oil and gas companies. Now let's look at local content practice and law in Ghana. Now, if you look at Ghana's local content LI, so first of all, let me state that in Ghana, our local content is governed by different laws. So we have the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, which was passed in 2016. Which specifies local content as an important element of petroleum agreements. And we can see that in section 60 to 69 of that act. Now, beyond that act, we have the local content regulation. The local content regulation, LI 2204. That regulation is dedicated to local content development in the country. It specifies what local content means. It specifies who is responsible for achieving local content in Ghana, the governance structures, the monitoring and reporting, the indicators for local content, and everything that we need to monitor and ensure that we are retaining value in the upstream operations and also along the supply chain. So if you look at regulation 49 of the local content LI 2204, local content means the quantum of or percentage of locally produced materials, personnel, financing, goods and services rendered in the petroleum value chain and which can be measured in monetary terms. Now, let's dig a bit deeper. When you take the local content LI, we see that in section 5, there is a local content committee. That committee is established under section 8 of the Petroleum Commissions Act 821. The Petroleum Commission is the regulator of the upstream oil and gas industry. The act that sets up Petroleum Commission is the Petroleum Commission Act 2011, Act 821. In section 8, the act establishes the local content committee, which is responsible for the achievement of local content in Ghana. Wow, I'm facing it. Okay, great. Now, in the local content regulation, you also see and annual local content plans. Now, the plan must include employment. How many locals is the company able to employ throughout the lifespan of the petroleum agreement? How many? So the company must now break that down into annual plans that each year, I, company XYZ, intend to employ X number of people. And the employment is also defined in various categories, which we'll see later. Now, there's also the requirement to provide technology transfer plan, how companies are going to acquire legal services is reserved for only services that the companies must transact with whilst operating in Ghana. There are also minimum thresholds that are set by the law. And then the other thing is that we don't want the law to be very rigid. And so the requirement of local content depends first on the company's work plan. We know that different companies have different fields, that blocks assigned to companies differ. They are not all the same. And so the requirement for investment is also different. And that will reflect in the local content policy. That is how flexible our local content policy is. Beyond that, our Minister of Energy is also given the power to amend or change the local content minimum requirements so that companies can meet the requirements that is set. Now, the regulation also specifies guidelines for award of contracts. It is always required that Ghanaian companies, indigenous Ghanaian companies, are prioritized over foreign companies at all levels of subcontracting or contracting. Now, within the petroleum agreement stage, upstream, where companies enter into agreement with government to extract the oil, it is required that a local Ghanaian company should be given priority. If there is no local Ghanaian company with all the requisite experience, financial muscles, and technological capacity, then we move on to look at a foreign company. Now, if there happens to, in the supply chain, the same principle applies. Now, in the supply chain, if there happens to be a bid and the bid between a foreign company and a local company are equal, then the company that has the highest local content within their proposal is the company that wins the bid. The law specifies that as well. The law also says that if there is a service that is required, but that service cannot be rendered by local, foreign company can do that. But before the foreign company does so, it must be a joint venture with a local partner, and that local partner must have a minimum of 10% equity. There are also reporting and monitoring requirements. Companies report quarterly, they report half yearly, and they report annually. And the Petroleum Commission's Local Content Committee is responsible for all the monitoring activities of local content implementation in Ghana. The Act also establishes a local content fund. The purpose of the fund is to ensure that we have money to train Ghanaians in technical areas. It also ensures investment in innovation, research, and development. It also provides funding for small, medium enterprises that may need financing to operate effectively within the supply chain. The sources of the fund come from oil and gas companies, as per Ghana. It also comes from 1% contracts that subcontractors get from oil and gas companies. It also makes room for allocations made by Parliament. So those are the sources of funding for the fund. Now, what you see on your screen is a summary of the local content pillars. So when you read the law, when you think of local content, this partnership comes to mind. The law requires that at all times, when there's a petroleum, apart from the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, which is the state entity, there has to be a private entity that should have at least 5% equity in a petroleum agreement. Without that, the petroleum agreement cannot be awarded. The second is the supply chain. Within the supply chain, technical and non-technical companies. Now, where the supply chain, where a company contracts with a company to supply them goods and services, and that company is a foreign company, that foreign company must by all means form a joint venture with a local, an indigenous Ghanaian company. The indigenous Ghanaian company has 51% of the Ghanaians. It also has 80% of management staff and senior staff being Ghanaian. And then the other staff, all others below management, 100% must be Ghanaians. When these indicators are met, then we can say that a company is an indigenous Ghanaian company. So for a foreign company to get a petroleum agreement, they need to partner with an indigenous Ghanaian company who has at least 5% equity. For a foreign company to supply within the supply chain, they must partner with an indigenous Ghanaian company which has at least 10% equity. There's also employment and training requirements. And there's a measurement for attainment of employment that is spelled out in the regulation. And then we have technology transfer, as I mentioned earlier on. Now, when we take the first one, ownership, equity participation, both in the petroleum agreement and in the supply chain, our research, Africa Center for Energy Policy conducted a research last year. We spoke to various stakeholders, including oil and gas companies, suppliers, the regulators, a host of stakeholders. And we asked them, what do you think is the reason for having local equity participation in petroleum agreement, the minimum 5% equity? And this is the results that came out. People think that we have to develop capacities. That is why we have the 5%. Skills and technology transfer. It helps to train indigenous Ghanaian companies. It also builds the financial capacity of indigenous Ghanaian companies. It enables locals to participate in the oil and gas value chain. And that helps us to retain value beyond the revenues that we get from oil. So by doing so, we also create more jobs, we broaden the tax net, and we enlarge the gains for Ghana. Now, according to our regulation, the local contents regulation, when a company signs an agreement with government, from the beginning to before the 5th year, they must have acquired or procured 10% goods and services from Ghana, from local indigenous Ghanaian companies. By the 5th year, when we measure their goods and services procurement, it should be 50%. And by the 10th year, it should be between 60 to 90%. When it comes to recruitment, we are very particular about increasing the role of Ghanaians in management decision-making at the company level. And so there are minimum threshold for companies to meet at the start, in the 5th year and in the 10th year, as you can see from your screen. We also have for technical staff and also other staff. Now, the reason we are very particular about technical core staff is that we believe that at some point in time, Ghanaians must control our resources ourselves. Because we have foreigners helping us to bring the resource out, they take their share, and that means Ghana loses some money. But when we train more people, when we train, we have more companies, Ghanaian companies operating, then we need to entire gas industry from extraction through to decommissioning by ourselves. Now, when it comes to non-technical staff, as you can see, because they are not technical, we expect that more Ghanaians get opportunities in the oil and gas companies. The moment they arrive, 80% of Ghanaians must be employed as non-technical staff. By the 5th year, 90% must be employed, and by the 10th year, 100% must be employed. Now let's look at the local content outcomes in employment for Ghanaians. This data is as at April 2019. Now, about 3,000 118 Ghanaians were employed in upstream in the oil and gas value chain in 30 companies. This is a study of 30 companies that we did, and this data is coming from the regulator, the Petroleum Commission. So this analysis is what we did, the sense we made from the data we got. So out of the 3,118 people that are employed in these 30 companies, about 2,319 are Ghanaians. Now, when you go to the management level, the management position, we have 64% of total management positions in these companies being occupied by Ghanaians. I must mention that about 11 companies out of the 13, out of the 30 companies still have foreigners dominating about 50% or over 50% of the management positions. And that means that we need to double up on improving on promotion of Ghanaians to management positions. So from here, you can see from this slide that by the 10th year, we should have been hitting 70 to 80%. But in actual sense, we have only 64% of people in management positions. And Ghana's oil and gas industry is 10 years now. Since production, I mean, it's more than 10 years. 2017 was the 10th year since discovery, but 2020 is the 10th year since production. And so by this time, we should have been seeing more people in management. But this is also good progress that we have achieved, if you consider the context within which local content developed. Now, when you look at the technical roles, there are about 1,529 people in technical roles, and only 58% are Ghanaians. Again, when you come back here, by the 10th year as we are in, we should have been seeing 70% to 80% Ghanaians being in technical roles, but we have 58. And for non-technical roles, 98% of the 2,304 people in non-technical roles are also Ghanaians. Now, let's look at goods and services, the supply chain. Oil and gas companies, 7 of them, spent 13.78 billion Ghana cedis between 2010 and 2018 in the Ghanaian economy along the supply chain. The data we have shows that the companies that are Ghanaian owned, majority in management who are Ghanaians and who are who have 100% non-technical staff, gain 12% of this value. The joint venture companies gain 54% of the total value. And I mentioned that these joint ventures are companies that are foreign, but they have to partner with local people who must have 10% stake in the company. And then we have foreigners supplying to the oil and gas companies. They don't have any form of Ghanaian content. 34% of this total 13.78 billion was spent on supplies from foreign companies. This scenario here clearly shows how, in spite of having the local content law, and in spite of achieving some gains, we still have challenges within the supply chain. We have faced problems with local companies fronting for foreign companies. So fronting basically means, because the law requires that a foreign company must partner with a local company in order to get a contract in Ghana, some local companies just use that as a business. They go in to partner with these companies without doing the work. The foreign companies come in to do the work. The locals do not do the work. They just front for them to get the job. And that in itself is self-defeating for the country, because we don't get to have the experience we need to build our competence to manage our own resources. Now, at the end of April 2019, about 701 companies were registered with the Petroleum Commission to supply to oil and gas companies. Now, looking at this graph, you can see that there are indigenous Ghanaian companies constituting 572. That is the majority. We have joint ventures. We also have, so there's a difference between indigenous Ghanaian companies, simpliciter, and full indigenous Ghanaian companies. So indigenous Ghanaian companies simpliciter means those companies that have 51% equity or more, 80% management being Ghanaians and 100% being Ghanaians within the non-management rules. But the full Ghanaian the full Ghanaian company means that the equity is 100%. For this one, the IGCs, the equity, the other companies other nationals might hold equity. But for this, the equity is fully Ghanaian. It's 100% Ghanaian. And then we have joint ventures. For this, we didn't find where they belong. So the total is 701. Now, out of this number, it was only 105 companies that had active contracts. So we have so many companies in the system, very few get contracts. Explain this. One of the key factors is that we have only 3 fields producing. The other fields are not currently, they are still under exploration, and there is not much expenditure at that phase. And so very few companies get that chance to operate. Now, the joint venture companies tend to do more work than the local companies themselves. And that is also because of the low capacity of our companies. They don't have that exposure to get that kind of contract that joint ventures can get with partnership from foreign companies. Now, when it comes to equity participation, when you look at our 18 petroleum agreement that is on our petroleum register, we have about 3 to 4 of these agreements that have local companies holding at least 5% equity. In some of the contracts, the equity is even lesser than 5%. The reason is that these contracts were signed before some of these contracts were signed before the local content policy was passed. Some contracts were also signed after the local content policy was passed, but we've seen that there are still some challenges with, companies taking advantage of that. We have one Ghanaian company, Springfield, that is holding majority equity in petroleum agreements. And they've become the leader and an example for more local companies to own interest and operate in upstream oil and gas. Now, in the supply chain, not many indigenous Ghanaian companies are doing technical work. Most of them are doing the non-technical work. And we've actually reserved some jobs that are non-technical, like catering, financial services, and those haulage and transportation for our locals. So that creates more jobs for the people of Ghana. Now, a lot of companies in Ghana are not able to do more technical work because they don't have the money to operate. The sector is very capital intensive, and getting the financing in Ghana is also very expensive. So that is one of the challenges that the IGCs face. They also do not have, because they have very minimum stake in petroleum agreements and within the supply chain contract, they are not able to make key input into management decisions. There's also corporate governance challenges of indigenous Ghanaian companies. Some companies do not understand company structures to be able to operate sustainably. There's also the challenge of technical know-how. So these are some of the challenges that if we address in Ghana, there'll be more opportunities for indigenous Ghanaian companies. And these are lessons that Mozambique and other countries can actually learn from Ghana in enforcing local content in their countries. Now, I wanted to give you a gist about the local content law and practice in Ghana's mining industry. To be frank, the mining industry in Ghana is more than 100 years old. The oil and gas industry came to meet the mining industry, but the oil and gas industry has advanced significantly in terms of regulating the sector from local content to contract award processes to fiscal governance to all the right things that government must do to ensure that the resource is beneficial to us. The oil and gas sector has overtaken the mining sector in advancing governance in Ghana, and that is quite problematic. A research study that I collaborated with a senior research analyst at the Chamber of Mines shows that, before 2012, when Ghana did not have any local content requirement in the mining industry, we had manufacturing we had mining companies procuring input from local manufacturers in Ghana. But after the local content policy came into force, manufacturing dropped, and we saw people importing. So over here, the stockists here mean you have Ghanaian companies importing the inputs that mining companies need into the country, and the mining companies procure from the Ghanaian companies that import. We also saw an increase in direct imports by the mining companies from companies outside of Ghana. And the reason we could assign to this is basically that the local content law that came in 2017 was not specific about what Ghanaian content means. It only said mining companies should procure from domestic sources. It did not specify whether the input should be manufactured in country or it should be one that is imported by a Ghanaian company. And that has resulted in a challenge for manufacturing in Ghana. Now, if you look at this diagram, it shows the various stages within the mining industry and what inputs the mining companies require. You will see that a lot of the inputs for mining companies in Ghana here come from local companies that operate in ancillary services. These are services that are not very technical. They are services that require some import of the goods for the mining companies. There is no work being done by local Ghanaian companies here, nothing by exploration companies here. And you see that the supplies on this chain is also very minimal. These are a list of 29 items that the Chamber of Mines and the Minerals Commission developed for local suppliers to deliver to mining companies. We see a similar trend in the employment of staff, especially senior staff. Before the local content law came in the mining sector in 2012, we had more locals, more Ghanaians occupying senior staff positions than foreigners. The situation did not change after the local content law. Fortunately for us, currently the government of Ghana is reviewing the local content law, and this time around, they are doing a lot of research to understand the local capacity in order to define the metrics so that we can see what we can do, what we cannot do, and how we can bridge the gap. So based on everything that I have said, what lessons can other countries learn from Ghana, including Mozambique? The first lesson for us at my organization, what we've seen is that a lot of African countries draft local content laws and set local content targets without understanding the local capacity. So it becomes very difficult for oil and gas companies and the mining companies to comply. Because when they come in the country and they want the local supplies, they don't see them. They want people to employ, they don't see them. When it comes to employment of technical people, local staff, one of the key challenges has been our educational system. We don't have institutions dedicated to training people for the sector. Such developments have been recent. If African countries must benefit from local procurement and the use of local people in the extractive industry, we need to understand our local capacities. We also need to invest in technology transfer. We observe that a lot of African countries, including Ghana, rely on foreign companies to do the technology transfer. But this is something that the government must take the lead to do. It also goes back again to the national system and also our technology transfer policy. After last year, the Petroleum Commission was now putting together a technology transfer policy for Ghana. The oil and gas industry has existed for a long time now, but it was not until last year that they put together the technology transfer policy. That means that before then, the companies dictated how they would transfer technology to our people. And it is not possible for the Petroleum Commission to monitor effectively whether the companies are actually doing their minimum or whether they can do more. It is important for countries to have technology transfer policy and ensure that the international oil and gas companies actually comply with this policy. It should give them that direction. I've already mentioned building local capacity through our education system, so I won't go back into it. We also need to encourage more local companies to form partnerships. We've observed from Ghana that a lot of these local companies want to operate on their own as individuals. Meanwhile, they do not have the required financial muscle. They don't have the required technological competence. And they'll rather prefer to partner a foreign company. Meanwhile, if local companies come together to form a strong force, they can gain more value in contracts and help to retain value in country. So it is important for that cooperation among local companies. Another problem we observed is the financial challenge that local companies face, and that is because of the high cost of capital in country. The high cost of capital is also a bigger problem that is emanating from poor economic management. When countries' economic policies and fiscal policies are well managed, it has impact on borrowing and lending rates, and that can improve on the financial sustainability of indigenous Ghanaian companies. Now, last but not the least, it is important for African countries to increase oil and gas discoveries, because without discoveries, there'll be no job for local people to take, whether be it as employees of oil and gas companies or as suppliers to oil and gas companies. So here comes the end of my presentation, and I thank you very much for listening to me. If you need further information, you can go through the references and you get more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline, for the very impressive and informative presentation on how Ghana and Ghanaians went about their local content policy. Much appreciated, Pauline. I will not attempt to do any sort of summary of what you have said, but you said it clearly loud that in order for emerging markets to benefit of, from the local policies, there is a need to do a lot of things, including fixing macroeconomic environment, stimulate resource discovery, development, and production, and clear technology transfer policy, and ensure international oil company compliance, but also, and importantly, to build local capacities through education, skills, and tech transfer. This is a critical issue. Most of the time, we complain that local capacities are not being properly used. But how qualified are these local capacities? How our education systems are training, are preparing our young people to be employable?
Necessários, portanto, dentro desta indústria específica. Estamos a falar do gás ou, no geral, na indústria extrativa. A indústria extrativa, como foi dito aqui, é extremamente intensiva em capital. Sendo intensiva em capital, significa que também é intensivo no conhecimento. É intensivo também na questão da pesquisa e desenvolvimento. Então, a componente de recursos humanos que entra, a componente produtiva que entra para a indústria é extremamente exigente. Então, este é onde está o nó do estrangulamento e é onde está o grande gap entre a legislação e aquilo que é a implementação. A legislação é bastante ambiciosa muitas vezes, e ela limita de certa forma, a capacidade de até as próprias empresas nacionais aproveitarem-se daquilo que é a transferência de tecnologia, que deveria acontecer em condições em que a legislação não é muito amarrada à questão do nacional. Uma das questões que nós estamos a olhar aqui é, de facto, que mesmo as joint ventures que são exigidas têm limites percentuais bastante amarradas. A questão de concursos para poder ganhar a participação das empresas também é bastante amarrante. Sendo isso, isso faz com que os últimos resultados do local content que a nossa apresentadora foi fazendo mostra este aspecto, é que as empresas ganesas não tiveram, de facto, a oportunidade de fazer o grasp de tudo aquilo que poderiam ter feito se tivessem optado por uma outra abordagem do local content. É verdade que a questão de joint venture é um caminho, mas não nos joint ventures muitas vezes limitam a participação dos nacionais por uma razão muito simples, é que os nacionais não têm capacidade financeira de participar nessas joint ventures. E como bem fez referência a apresentadora, tem um problema também de que o capital é bastante custoso. O custo é extremamente alto. E porque é extremamente alto, as empresas nacionais têm dificuldade de ir pedir emprestado de dinheiro, participar numa joint venture e depois começar a fazer a discussão mais viva para permitir que os ganhos continuem a ficar no país. No caso de Moçambique, nós tínhamos esse problema com o CTA, e o problema que nós estávamos a ter com o CTA era, de facto, esta questão, e eles queriam fazer o carry. Não é apropriado para um processo de participação no contexto de joint venture. Então, há aqui um problema de que a joint venture em que temos um mecanismo de participação das empresas locais baseado no carry, esse vai limitar significativamente a entrada do capital. Nesse caso, tivemos que fazer uma discussão e chegarmos a uma conclusão de que para incentivar, portanto, a entrada de capital estrangeiro, investimento estrangeiro nessa componente, era preciso que os nacionais pudessem pôr alguma coisa. Portanto, não era necessário que os nacionais pudessem pôr eles sozinhos, mas podia ser um grupo de empresários que pudessem participar em 5% ou 10%, mas que pudessem colocar esse montante na joint venture. E eu penso que essa é uma das grandes limitantes que tem acontecido em muitos países, e no caso de Gana, penso que também não tem sido muito feliz, no sentido de que não há muitas empresas que vão participar nas joint venture. No mesmo tempo, começa a entrar a dominância, portanto, das empresas externas no contexto. Há uma questão que a apresentadora levantou, e este que devia ser o foco fundamental do local content, é a produção doméstica. A produção doméstica é aquela que devia ser, portanto, que o local content devia dar mais incentivo. Muitas vezes, a mobilização do investimento direto estrangeiro para a produção dentro do país, sem necessariamente arrumar ou forçar essa questão da participação dos indígenas, pode dar provavelmente maior resultado, no sentido de quanto é que você consegue incorporar do conteúdo local no processo de produção e, portanto, na toda a cadeia de produção. Portanto, estes são alguns elementos que eu acho que, se nós focalizarmos mais na produção e não no capital, podemos provavelmente ter um ganho muito maior nesta questão do local content, do que, de facto, nós estamos a conseguir ganhar neste momento. E é por isso que há muitos desafios em toda a cadeia. Se olharmos para o scaling que ela mostrou, um dos últimos slides que ela mostrou, do scaling, vamos ver que na exploração não aparece nada, no desenvolvimento e a avaliação ambiental não aparece nada. Então, as empresas ganesas aparecem fundamentalmente para pequenas coisas. Então, grande parte do ganho que devia ficar no país é aquele que sai para fora, não é? E nós estivemos a fazer a discussão disto, só para dar um exemplo. Se uma empresa moçambicana é dada para fornecer, por exemplo, um conjunto de bens para a indústria extrativa, neste caso para a indústria do gás, etc., etc., localmente não há produção. O que ele vai fazer é pegar esse dinheiro e fazer a importação. E é isso que está acontecendo no Ghana. Vimos ali naquele gráfico de barras, que grande parte da importação, daquilo que devia ser comprado aqui domesticamente, isso é importado. O que significa o quê? Que uma empresa do Ghana ganha o concurso, como a produção não existe domesticamente, o que vai fazer é importar. E a importação tem um custo. E esse custo pode andar à volta de 60% do valor que a empresa ganha vai para fora. Então, o local content aqui não faz muito sentido. Então, para mim, o local content, que é o aspecto que a apresentadora fez referência, mas que não é o foco do local content nesse sentido, é que a produção é que devia ser mais focalizada. Então, qual é a componente, qual é o percentual, não do ponto de vista de empresas indígenas, mas do ponto de vista de o que as empresas estão a incorporar do local no processo de produção, em toda a cadeia de valor. Isso é que é mais importante, eu penso. E isso vai fazer com que a dinâmica econômica vai acontecer, as empresas vão empregando mais e mais pessoas ao longo da cadeia de valor, e isso vai também fortalecer a formação profissional, porque as empresas vão cada vez mais demandando uma formação profissional cada vez mais forte, vai fortalecer o processo de produção no contexto de standardização dos processos de produção, porque uma das coisas que essas grandes empresas trazem é que as empresas do Ghana não respeitam os estándares internacionais. Então, nós não podemos comprar o produto do Ghana ou de Moçambique ou de Nigéria, porque os estándares de produção não são aqueles que são internacionalmente aceitos. E, consequentemente, temos que voltar ao processo de importação. O que estamos a fazer é, o dinheiro que é gerado aqui e é colocado no país como se fosse local content, volta a sair no processo de importação. Se local content volta outra vez a sair para fora. E com os processos de transferência de preços, quando nós vamos importar, como são poucos, vamos comprar naqueles que eles já têm uma espécie, digamos, cota daqui, uma espécie de contrato, uma espécie de agreement, gentleman agreement, e nós estamos a comprar a um preço que já é praticamente de transferência. Então, eu penso que o Ghana está de parabéns porque conseguiu fazer essa transição da legislativa, essa transição legislativa da lei para o regulamento e do regulamento para a tentativa de implementação. Mas, como se vê, os resultados não estão a aparecer. E não estão a aparecer porque a lei e o regulamento não têm em consideração aquilo que é a capacidade doméstica de produzir os bens e serviços para esse tipo de empresas. E, segundo, nós estamos a olhar com muita força a componente produtiva. E é esta parte produtiva que eu penso que devemos concentrar mais esforço para garantir que as empresas sejam quais sejam elas possam fazer a produção no nosso território e garantir que eles forneçam maior e exigirmos que mais percentual de local content entre em toda a cadeia de valor. Um exemplo mais ou menos é o Brasil, não é? O Brasil, no local content deles, eles exigem quanto do produto brasileiro entrou nesta peça. Qual é o local content brasileiro está aqui, neste produto. E isto é que faz com que haja um conjunto de outras empresas à volta disso. Um outro aspecto, por último, que eu penso que é importante fazer a referência é esta questão de quem é que controla o local content. Este é um outro elemento bastante importante, a questão institucional. A questão institucional é extremamente importante. E as nossas instituições em África são bastante fracas. Medir este local content. Eu não sei se Gana tem um mecanismo, uma fórmula que lhes permite medir um local content. Por exemplo, num catering, como é que vai medir que neste catering temos tanto por cento de local content? Às vezes nós não temos mecanismo. Então, estes elementos, que é o building capacity das instituições, é também extremamente importante para garantir que o local content seja efetivamente controlado, seja efetivamente olhado de forma a medirmos exatamente aquilo que é o local content. De forma outra, vamos continuar e as empresas vão dizer, nós pedimos o fornecimento de bens à Pauline Companhia, né? E Pauline Company é uma empresa ganesa, mas a empresa ganesa não comprou dentro do país, foi importar da China, do não sei onde. Então, isto não é local content para mim. Portanto, local content é a incorporação, a utilização da matéria-prima nacional no processo de produção para fornecer à indústria extrativa. Eu posso parar por aqui por enquanto.
Muito obrigado, professor NHABINDE. Thank you very much, Prof. NHABINDE. Pauline, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, yes. We had translation.
Yes.
But, you know, sometimes we say translators are traitors. So I will attempt to briefly tell you what Prof. NHABINDE was saying, and I think rightly. He commended you for successfully putting in place the policy infrastructure for local content. But he says there are two distinct paths of putting in place local content policy as a key policy for national development. Here in Mozambique, he says, we call it national content. There is, I don't fully agree with him, but that's what he says. And what he's saying is the following. The two paths. One is the focus on participation of indigenous companies in the procurement process for international oil companies in the supply chain. So what he says, in so doing, you end up exporting the much needed hard currency, because what happens is that indigenous companies, they procure for those goods and services overseas using hard currency. They export that currency, which is much needed here. So in the end, there is no local content. What you have is an elite content where highly connected people, they have those contracts, they go to China, they import, they supply, then they cash the money. So basically, you have a sort of elite that is at the service of IOCs. The other path is that of focus on production. So the question is, how much of local content is incorporated in production? How much of local knowledge, goods and services is incorporated in the final product? They gave an example of Brazil, where people ask, in this particular product, how much is local? Over to you, Pauline. He's our discussant. He's from the ministry. Over to you.
Yes, thank you for the additional information. I agree with him to a very large extent. When we talk about local content, and specifically when we talk about local supplies and procurement from the local economy, in Ghana, we have a term called the Ghanaian content. If you look at our local regulation, the local content regulation, it talks about the plan for Ghana to improve value addition to our raw materials, right? So that speaks to production. But the journey to achieving that is not a straightforward journey. It's a very long process. When we look at our African economy, our local economies, we import basic things, as basic as toothpaste from elsewhere. We are not an economy, the African economy is not one that is self-reliant on the basic things that we need. So to think of the technical inputs that oil and gas companies need, we've not really reached there yet. That said, there are also certain things that, so in Ghana here, we have reserved certain inputs for Ghanaians and Ghanaian suppliers. There are certain things that can easily be produced in Ghana. That include anything catering. That means we want to, so the plan is that we want to improve on our agriculture. Agriculture sector can feed directly into this. Something like bread from another country. Mm-hmm. The same is with gas. These are a lot of local companies dominate that area and they supply to the oil and gas industry. But beyond the non-technical, we are looking at, we want to build our competence in order to manage the sector ourselves. That requires us to do technical work. But we don't have, we don't have that capacity yet to provide that detailed technical work to the standard that is required of the industry. Some industries, some companies are trying very hard in Ghana. We can talk about companies doing fabrication in Ghana. Initially, fabrication was done elsewhere, but now fabrication is done in country. We have companies like Amaja, for instance, doing that. And we realize that those companies that are able to provide technical services have that expertise in other sectors of the economy. One of the companies that we interviewed last year for our research was operating in the consumables. So they were supplying to Coca-Cola, and they were also providing technical support to Coca-Cola's technical operations. And that knowledge, that skill was transferable to the oil and gas sector. So they did everything in Ghana here. But there are certain other aspects of the operations of oil and gas industry that we cannot produce in country. So I get the point that my co-panelist is making. It's a very valid point. And the ideal is for Ghanaian companies, Mozambican companies, and African companies to produce whatever they supply to international oil and gas companies in country. That is the best way we can achieve the value, the full value that we want to retain. That is the true local content. But it is a journey. We are not there yet. That is also the reason I propose for African countries to understand the capacity and the competencies. Which areas do we have comparative advantage? And how can we harness those advantages, the comparative advantages for the supply chain to ensure that there is in-country production? This is not something we can achieve overnight. The oil and gas company, the local content in Ghana is only 7 years old. We've seen improvement. We've seen a lot of changes. There is more to be done. There's more work to do. And so to sum it all up, I totally agree with my co-panelist. There is the need for domestic production. That means we also have to have industrial policies in place. The oil and gas industry must be properly linked to other aspects of the economy. We can't isolate the industry from other economic sectors in our countries. And when that is done, when we have a strategic plan for how we can ensure forward, sideward, and backward linkages, we can achieve the true local content that he's talking about.
Thank you very much, Pauline. You said it's a journey. We are not yet there. You have also said that though Ghana is now internationally known for its vibrant oil and gas industry, it has started long time ago with the mining sector. I remember watching a team, the Ashanti, from the Anglo Gold Ashanti, coming here in Maputo to play. That was a long time ago. So you are very well experienced with that. And you said, we are not yet there. How do you assess the glass? Is half full or half empty? Thank you.
I like to be a very positive person. So I would say that the glass is half full. But the fact that I'm a positive person does not also mean that when there are challenges, I should close my eyes to them. So we also recognize that the glass is also half empty. We have a long way to go. The oil and gas industry is only 10 years old in Ghana as far as production is concerned, and 13 years old as far as discovery is concerned. When I look back at how the journey started to now, we've made significant progress on many fronts in terms of regulation, in terms of putting in place the required governance structures. We've made strides. Implementing the system we've put in place, the institutions and the laws, is also another thing that we keep working on. With local content monitoring and implementation, for instance, it has not been easy for both the oil and gas companies and for the government. So from our research, we got the idea from the companies that the process is too bureaucratic. So, and it's very demanding. It is the system of reporting, for instance, is not very well standardized. So it is quite difficult for them to report on time at the times they are required to do so. At the same time, when you look at the regulator side, we still, as a young nascent oil and gas industry in Ghana, we still haven't had a full grasp of understanding the full details of what is required in the sector. It has been a learning process for us. And that is why, how come, for example, it is just last year that we developed the technology transfer policy. It's been a learning process. Our regulators also need capacity building. They also need to improve on the bureaucracies that are involved in the whole reporting and monitoring processes. And so when I compare the oil and gas sector to the mining industry, we have made significant progress. And that is because of the lessons we learned from the mining industry. That is why I think the glass is half full. But looking at where we are and where we can go, and judging that by the evidence I have shown you about the local content achievements in employment and local procurement and equity participation, there's a long way to go. And we need the concerted effort of all key players to achieve this.
Okay, thank you. We have only 9 minutes to go before we close. We have from one of our participants from the chat box. For you in Ghana, how do you view action? Do you look at it as foreign? Look, and Professor NHABINDE, how do you consider that aspect in the Africa? Foreign, or you can consider them as local? We have 2.5 minutes each of you.
I would like to pick a discussion that Pauline raised on the fact that we need to consider our comparative advantage. That's true, but many African countries have to supply to extractive industry, have so many areas of comparative advantage, not the high tech, but just the simple things like gloves, for example. Simple things like this, So just to mention a few. On relation to the issue of Zimbabwe products or South African products, I still consider that local content are bounded by our frontiers. And therefore, if we wanted to consider that as a regional opportunity, we can still consider that. But remember that we have enormous challenges in country, and also we see enormous potential. So we need to research. First of all, what are the opportunities we have, and then so forth, regional and trans-regional and so forth. I think still that local content should consider that country and also supply it inside the country to any area, and in particular to extractive industry, as we are discussing about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I will give you 3 more minutes. Professor NHABINDE, I'm giving you now 3 more minutes. We have 1. Local content law is contradicting agreements with the multinationals, where, for instance, multinationals got their finance by credits, which are bound to procurement from the country of the origin of the credit. God of the United States. And what about if that loan, that agreement says
Yeah, first of all, if we sign an agreement of that kind, it would be a very big mistake. Actually, it should be a big mistake. Of course, the national laws are normally above all. So I think that there's no any contradiction related to what we call international law and agreement, then that would not be a problem. And therefore, I think any agreement of such kind should not be above what the local content should require.
People are complaining, and I also do complain. I do complain that most of the funding that is said to be being invested in Mozambique at the moment is not yet creating jobs in Mozambique. If we were to look at what international companies claim to have invested in Mozambique at the moment, it is at the level of billions of dollars. But we are not creating jobs in Mozambique, particularly in an urgent need in order to address the day after day government. There are billions being invested in Mozambique. Don't you think that this is the real problem? It is not a theoretical. It's a real to be addressed.
Yes, I think we can address this discussion in 2 ways. There this way, these questions that you are putting up front, which I think are relatively more need to be more elaborated about that. And particularly need to be a discussion which is much more broader, not only related to local content. It's a question that needs to be more in terms of the general. As Pauline said, and all of us we have been saying for all this time, extractive industry is skilled, and the invested in most of these is high skill demanding job. And we need to invest, that's true, that we need to invest in more technical school, building skill of these young people in order to be in a competitive position to be contracted to those kind of jobs. Otherwise, we will still face significant difficulties. We faced this in TETE, as you know. For example, in the case of coal extraction, we faced that. We also faced it in the case of Mozal, you know that. But as we are growing, we are filling slowly the gap. But we need to know in our mindset that filling that gap is not a matter of 1, 2, 3 years. It will take some time. It requires also the building up of institutions, not only for training, but also for evaluating the quality of those those people. So there are so many issues around that, but I agree that the investment has not been creating job, but the reason of not creating a job, we all know. Technical skills is a problem, is a real constraint in this country and in many other African countries. Mozambique is a good example of a real problem in technical skills, because we have not really invested enough in technical schools, and particularly in the area of extractive industry, which is a new, actually, as Pauline said. Even Ghana started in 2010 exploring developing the petroleum industry, is still far of filling the gap of skills in the extractive industry. So we need to continue working. We need to urgently invest in technical schools, those schools that will actually bring the skills for people to be employed in extractive industry. I'm not saying theoretical, I'm saying in real terms.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, sir.
You still sounded theoretical. We need to address this. As I've indicated in the introduction, we are biased as CDD towards.
Let Pauline goes, and then we discuss together.
We are biased towards using local content as a way of addressing the Cabo Delgado situation. Pauline, over to you now.
Well, okay, so I would like to speak a bit to the employment situation. I remember that before the local content law was passed in Ghana in 2013, we had companies operating in the country. There was no local content law, but a company like Talo was very intentional about employing Garniers, and they went full on to employ Garniers in both technical and non-technical areas. And we went as far as looking for Ghanaians outside the country to come home to work in Talo, for instance. So, and Talo did this because they understood that even in the absence of a regulation, it is their responsibility, and it adds to the value of the company getting in country. When foreign companies operate in a country and people don't see the visible benefits, like in simple areas like employment, it becomes a problem. And the company understood how that can impact on its operations. So Talo was very intentional about that, even before the coming of the local contents law. And after the local contents law, companies like Talo and others are also, making efforts to improve on employing Ghanaians. Now, one thing I would say about the employment, which countries must pay very, very particular attention to, is how to measure employment. Are we willing to measure it in terms of numbers, as in number of Ghanaians, number of Mozambicans employed in the oil and gas industry, or we are willing to assess it in terms of value, quantum, how much money is spent by companies in salaries? What we've observed is that we have locals with the same competence as foreigners in working in Ghana in the same companies, but are paid differently. Companies will report that, yes, they've employed X number of Ghanaians, but the real effect of the employment, which is in the remuneration, is different for Ghanaians compared to foreigners, even though they have the same competencies. So this is an area that needs attention by regulators in the various African countries to say about the employment bit. Now, on the issue about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and how that conflicts with local content, it is an issue that the question is a very valid question, and it is indeed a question that is being asked everywhere in Africa. In Ghana, we've had that discussion. Last 2 years or so, we had the Africa Oil Governance Summit in Accra, and we discussed how the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and local content conflict and how we can resolve it. Now, the ACTA, which is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, is an international treaty, basically among African countries. And it is within the realms of public international law. So in Ghana and like other African countries, we must adopt that law into our domestic law in order to implement it. Until that is done, we cannot implement it. So the moment the Parliament of Ghana adopts that law, it becomes part of our law and we are compelled to adhere to it. Now, each country, including Ghana, has the local content law, which sort of contradicts the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in the sense that the local content law is saying foreign companies in Ghana must procure Ghanaian goods, must employ Ghanaians, must use domestic inputs. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area is saying, allow foreigners into your country to work. There should be free movement of goods. There should be free movement of people. So the question is, how do we resolve it? Well, it is not simple, but it is very doable. When I was presenting, I showed you the data on the number of companies that are registered in Ghana's supply chain, about 702 of the companies. I also showed you how many of these companies have valid contracts. That's about 105. So over 600 companies are in Ghana looking for opportunities in Ghana, but they cannot find those opportunities. The Africa Continental Free Trade opens up opportunities for these companies to move out into other African countries, which are also new in the oil and gas industry, like Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, to provide the services that they could have provided in Ghana, but for lack of opportunity. When we see the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as an opportunity for us to send out our domestic industries, it in effect helps us to build our local competencies for that agenda. So it has its good side. It is up to countries now to readjust and retool the local content policy to accommodate the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement in ways that work best for each country. So that is what I have to say about it. It's a very challenging situation, but it presents opportunities that we must take advantage of. That requires that we retool our local content policy to accommodate the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in ways that work best for each country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline.
I can put a challenge to Pauline.
Say it again.
I can put a challenge to Pauline about the African Continental Free Trade Area against the local content. The problem is that when it comes to election, for example, who is electing the government body? The presidency is the national. You will start facing some social and in particular social problems which affect the Ghanaian government, not the continental. We understand that we need this the compatibility of local content and the continental free trade area at the very high political level. But when it comes down, everything trickles down to the country itself. The problem is where they come, because in fact the population of that country is the one that has to decide on their own rights, and they will demand from the government that they elect for providing goods and services.
Okay, I don't know if I properly understood what you said. But if I understand you, what you are saying is that the Africa Continental Free Trade implementation in the various African countries have political implications as well. And it also affects people's rights, because people must have a say in how economic issues, they should have a say in the economic situation of their country. If what I've just said is exactly what you said, I want to refute that as well. I think that instead of seeing this opportunity, so first of all, I see the sense in what you are saying. There are political costs to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, but that political cost comes to those countries that are not ready for it. Because we have to look at it from, when we are looking at the cons of it, we also need to look at the positive sides of it. When we allow other companies in Africa to come into our countries, to Ghana, when they come in, they also bring in jobs. The jobs that our companies here cannot provide. There may be African countries that, companies in other African countries that have the competence to help us to extract our resources, for instance. And then the Africa Continental Free Trade Area enables that to happen. When they come, it is the Ghanaians that they would employ. It is the Mozambicans that they would employ. So it is about how the country sets to tool its laws and policies in ways that benefit the country. You don't from to tailor it to your needs. Once the country is able to figure out what it wants from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, I'm sure that that country can benefit.
Thank you very much, Pauline. We have come to the end of local content, oil and gas, new markets, focusing not only in the global south, where peer countries, they have spearheaded local content policies. I would like to thank you, Pauline, for brilliant presentation, for engaging so solidly on the issues. We have learned a lot from this, and we will keep engaging. And I would like also to thank ACEP for the partnership and for the good work that you are doing, not only in Ghana, but also across West Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. To Professor NHABINDE, thank you very much for the updates and for engaging in the discussion and for taking some of the tough questions asked to you. A special thank you to the Ministry of Economy and Finance for the partnership in this important initiative. As we have said, we aim at influencing not only you, but the entire government to swiftly move into enacting local content policy and quickly implementing it, because not only the private sector needs, the country needs, but particularly for spatial development in Cabo Delgado, where we are facing a bloody insurgency, which is in fact sitting in between us and the exploration of that world-class gas reserve that we have there. We will convene in the next week with experience of Nigeria. Information will be shared. I thank you very much. I thank my team, the IT team, and the whole CDD staff for supporting in this process today. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.